Welcome to the WRRC Podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and you're in the right place. Here at the Well-Rounded Counselor Podcast, what you can expect is to learn, shift your thinking, and gain personal and professional growth. And if you have not yet done so, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. The conversation starts now. Welcome back, listeners, to another enlightening episode of the WRRC Podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Her name is Joanna Cruz, and she is a true champion of empowering young people to reach their highest potential. Jo's journey began as a teacher of A-level politics and economics of one of the UK's leading schools, where she quickly realized the importance of blending education and entrepreneurship. Now, as a strategy consultant and head of schools for Ox Sprite, she works tirelessly to provide high school students with online courses and internships that give them a competitive edge in today's ever-changing world. What sets Jo apart is her unwavering commitment to social change. She passionately believes the power of entrepreneurship to transform lives and communities. Through her advisory and mentoring roles in organizations like Oxis and Charity Works and Founders for Schools, Jo continues to widen access to opportunities for young people and make a lasting impact. Beyond her professional achievements, Jo's thought leadership has garnered attention worldwide. She regularly writes and speaks for the topic of entrepreneurship, and her insights have been sought after by prominent media outlets, including BBC World News. Today, we are privileged to have Jo Cruz on the WRRC Podcast, where she will share her expertise and insights on entrepreneurship, education, and social change. Her vast knowledge and experiences are sure to inspire and motivate us all. So without further ado, let's dive into an enlightening conversation and welcome the incredible Jo Cruz. Hey, Jo, how are you today?
Hi, really well, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about your journey, Jo.
So I think I've had what in some ways is an unconventional journey. I've done lots of different things and I've worked all over the world, and it definitely took me a while to figure out what I wanted to be doing professionally, and how to find the best vehicle for that. However, I say unconventional, but I think it's actually becoming increasingly conventional for people to have these quite circuitous career paths. It's something we talk a lot about to the students that we work with. So yeah, I suppose unconventional in some ways, conventional in others. I think there are potentially a few aspects of the journey I've had to where I am now that may be worth highlighting for your listeners. So I was born in the UK, but I actually grew up in South Africa. So I've had this quite interesting experience of living in two very interesting countries. My father worked for a long time in the Middle East, so I've spent a fair amount of time there as well. So I suppose one of the things that I kind of went into the working world with was an understanding of working in different contexts, and I was really interested in what that could bring to working environments, different perspectives, and having people who come from different places and different cultures. I think I'm someone that's really, I think I describe myself as kind of purpose-driven. It's really important to me to do work that matters to me and aligns with who I think I am. And I started my career originally in politics in South Africa, which I loved and I found incredibly stimulating and incredibly rewarding. And I then decided to move into the education sector, firstly, as you mentioned, as a teacher of A-level politics and economics at a fantastic school in the UK, and then took that love for education into the entrepreneurship world. So I suppose I've occupied these three different spheres broadly: the political sphere, the education sphere, and the entrepreneurship sphere. And now the great joy of the work I do is trying to find a way to combine all three of those.
I love that. Now, throughout your career, you've been deeply involved in the education entrepreneurship sectors, which you've mentioned. How do you see that these two fields are intersecting, and why is it important to infuse entrepreneurial thinking into education?
It's been really interesting to observe how much closer those sectors have become. So even when I started consulting, which was about 5 years ago now, there was some conversation about the role of entrepreneurship in education, but that conversation has really gained traction since then, which is enormously exciting. I think there are different ways that entrepreneurship can slot into education. So one of them is in kind of literal ways, thinking about what value might the perspectives of entrepreneurship have for young people who are trying to think about how they can thrive in a world that is uncertain and moving quickly. So I'm doing some really interesting work with a fantastic school in the UK called Dulwich College around how can they embed entrepreneurship, which is something that they do incredibly well already, but how can they embed it even more meaningfully in the curriculum? So that, I think, is one aspect, is many schools are now saying, look, we think this is actually something we need to really give space and time to within the school. How do we embed that meaningfully in the curriculum? I definitely also see changes in terms of how schools are operating as institutions. I think particularly in the UK, it's a really challenging time for schools. And increasingly, I see schools embracing kind of entrepreneurial thinking in a way that, you know, many potentially haven't done explicitly up until this point. That's enormously exciting. See schools really wanting to bring data into how they're making decisions in a way that potentially hasn't been done as much up to this point. So that's also interesting. It's not just thinking about how is entrepreneurship and education, how are those two things moving closer together from a student perspective, but also looking at schools as large organizations and institutions. And it's really exciting for me what entrepreneurs are, or what value entrepreneurship can add to schools. I think the last thing I'd say is I see a lot of my work as being a kind of an interpreter between these two worlds, like the world of schools and the world of business and startups. And I don't think it's a one-way flow. I think there is a lot that entrepreneurs, particularly those working in the education sector, can and should learn from schools. A lot of the time, the conversations I have with the entrepreneurs I work with, it's like, I've been a classroom teacher. There are 100 reasons why that idea might sound great to you, but won't necessarily work in a classroom. So I think it's very important that there is a conversation both between the entrepreneurial world and schools, but also conversely, entrepreneurs need to think about what they can learn from schools and school leaders.
I think that's really good. And it's good that you are sharing this kind of information with schools. And I do see like innovation hubs or incubators kind of popping up within schools here in the UAE, whether it's in AI or business and entrepreneurship. I'm seeing these kind of buzzwords and they're kind of coming to life, taking shape and form, especially here in the UAE, because it is such a hub in the region and now becoming a hub in the world. So it's embedded slowly but surely into the schools, where it's moving away from not only the theoretical, but it's more going into the practical hands-on. And I think that's going to be really important. So tell us a little bit about Ox Sprite and you as the head of schools and the work you provide to high school students.
Sure. So Ox Sprite is an organisation that was spun out of a sister company called Oxford Scholastica Academy, who I've had the real joy and pleasure of working with for the last kind of 7 years or so. Ox Sprite was established to offer students around the world the chance to engage in online programs that would really give them the edge in their futures. And it was born of a worldview that was shaped by the team that founded the organization, which was very much that the world, it's an uncertain time. There is a lot going on around us, and it's a potentially quite a scary time to be a teenager. And our view very much was that we want to equip young people with tools and insights and knowledge and give them exposure to incredible people that will enable them to view those uncertainties not with trepidation, but with excitement and hope and optimism. And we do that in a number of ways. So we run online programs that enable students to explore their subject of interest outside the confines of the curriculum. We run internships and research internships, so work experience and research internships, to give students access to those kinds of really rich applied learning experiences that often can be really difficult to secure, particularly in subjects like medicine, for example. And we also run online conferences to give students a sense of what's happening in the kind of cutting edge of their fields.
Wow, that's amazing. And do you have any success stories or examples of how these opportunities have impacted students' lives in a positive way?
Sure, it is. It really, I think, for all of us is the driving force behind what we do, why we do. I think when you see the tangible impact that these programs have on the incredible students who take our programs, it really is. It makes kind of everything worth it. I joined the team initially as a tutor myself, and so I had the real pleasure of actually being in the physical classroom at that stage. And I've also done some online tuition with Ox Sprite as well. I think for me, there were a few students I remember who were doing my debate and public speaking course where, they start the course at the beginning of that 2-week period, pretty nervous, not wanting to engage that much. And by the end, you see this kind of full trajectory that they've gone on and a huge amount of confidence, and you see them kind of just blossom in front of you. We had a really amazing story of a student who joined us on one of our online programs at the beginning of COVID. And he had gone to school in the UK. He'd found that time just incredibly difficult to manage. He was feeling pretty unmotivated. And he joined one of our online programs. I think it was in computer science, if I remember correctly. No, engineering. And his mum said it was actually just amazing to watch because he went from being frustrated, feeling pretty trapped at home during lockdown, not feeling very motivated, and suddenly he'd rush down to the dinner table at night and have loads of things to share with her about what he was doing in the day. And she saw a complete kind of transformation in him. And that was just hugely gratifying for us. At that time, Ox Sprite was a very small entity. We were just starting the online part of what we do, and that was enormously exciting. And I think what that example speaks to is the power of the programs that we deliver, not just to support students' super curricular learning, but also give them a sense of community, which is so valuable, and helps them to sustain their interest in their subject.
So this isn't in my questions, but I wanted to ask you the question of, if I'm counseling my students and they're sitting in front of me, what would you want me to say the benefits are of taking a course with Ox Sprite? What are like the top 1 to 3 benefits of taking a course with Ox Sprite?
The first thing I'd say is that we believe that every student should have access to high quality careers guidance and careers resources, irrespective of their means. So a big part of what we do is provide really high quality free resources for educators and for students, so that irrespective of where they are and what kind of circumstances they might find themselves in, they are able to access those kind of resources for free. And that's very much kind of part of our worldview. So I think that's the first thing I'd say, is that's there for all educators and all students. To give you an example of what those look like, we've just launched a really exciting new career test, which enables students to take what's actually a relatively short test, 5 to 10 minutes. And because of the way the test is designed, it creates a hyper-personalized report for that student, curating really ideal career options for them, and also linking to things that students are telling us they care about now in terms of their career. Like, we can give them an evaluation of the potential climate impact of possible career choices, and we can look at things like the work-life balance. So what we're trying to do is really give students a much deeper insight into possible career options, and give them some resource recommendations. Those kinds of tools are free. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is, for those students who are wanting to do an even deeper dive, particularly those students that are thinking about applying to competitive universities, particularly in the UK or the US, it's incredibly important for them to demonstrate interest in a subject beyond the curriculum. Absolutely. So the second thing I'd say is, the programs that we deliver give them an extraordinary chance to explore their subject with someone who is an expert in their field, who comes from a competitive university themselves. So they will have either, they'll be studying there or have studied there. That's an extraordinary thing for them to put in a college application or in a personal statement if they're applying to the UK. The third thing I'd say is that we increasingly see, I mean, this has always been the case, but even more so because these courses are so competitive, the students who are interested in things like law and medicine, where there is a real emphasis on gaining experience before applying to university. The work experience internships, the research internships that we run are, for me, some of the most exciting things of what we do. We give students the chance to work with an academic mentor from an exceptional institution, and they actually guide them through the process of crafting an academic paper, which is not something most students get the chance to have access to. I can see you're giving me thumbs up as we're talking. And that, for me, is exceptional because they get the subject insight and they get the skills that put them in a really powerful position when it comes to applying to university. So those would be my top three. Great free tools, amazing super curricular development through our online programs, and then supplemented with exceptional work experience opportunities.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. I love that you almost want to like give back in a way that a lot of other companies are not necessarily giving back. Like, I feel like people who go into education initially, they want to be of service to students initially. Like most educators, they want to be of service. And then as time goes, you want to build on that. And of course, you're at that phase where you are an entrepreneur yourself, but you're also into social change, right? So let's talk a little bit about the social change, and this is a driving force behind the work that you do. And how do you believe that entrepreneurship can be used as a powerful tool for bringing social change? And what are some of the projects or initiatives you've been involved with to exemplify this?
There are two, I suppose, points I'll make just as context before I jump into my answer. One is I started my career working in politics. So in some ways, I was trying to tackle social problems at a macro level, a systemic level, a kind of policy level. And in some ways, I found that very gratifying, but in other ways, I found that really frustrating because I felt very disconnected from the people that these policies were intended to support. When I was working as a teacher, I was almost working at the complete other end of the spectrum. So on the front line, with a classroom of students, and I adored that, and I found it incredibly rewarding. But at the same time, I could see systemic problems that were affecting schools and students and teachers, and I was frustrated that I didn't have the capability or the remit to be able to solve them in the classroom. For me, entrepreneurship is the kind of perfect blending of those worlds. It enables you to tackle systemic problems, but do so in a way which feels or felt to me more tangible. And that I find enormously exciting. I think I stumbled into entrepreneurship by chance. I had no interest in entrepreneurship when I was at school. I didn't really know anyone who was an entrepreneur per se. I come from a family of journalists and doctors. So I think I'm an accidental entrepreneur in a lot of ways. I think the thing that pushed me into entrepreneurship was frustration and a desire to solve a problem, and I had to figure out the best vehicle to do that. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about entrepreneurship as a tool for social change, because entrepreneurs tend to be people who are fixated on a particular problem, and that often makes them really well placed to solve that problem. And I think that's why often they generate really exciting solutions. Often people will say, well, shouldn't that be left to, for example, the charity sector, who obviously have an incredibly important role to play? And my response is, I think we need both. We need lots of different types of models and lots of different ways of tackling problems. But I think there is something about the revenue generating necessity of being an entrepreneur that forces you to think about potentially more innovative solutions, to work in more interesting ways sometimes. And I think that's very exciting. So the way that I first started to explore this world meaningfully was I did a bit of an unconventional thing. I took a kind of adult gap year when I was 28 with my now husband. And we planned a trip from Alaska to Argentina, and we were going to spend 9 months interviewing social entrepreneurs across the Americas. And we did that because we were fascinated by this phenomenon, which at that stage was just starting, and we wanted to learn more about how people were using business as a force for good. And I think that for me was kind of the first step really on this literal and metaphoric journey.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I read that in your bio and I was like, she did what? That's super cool. That is so cool. That's like a whole nother episode in itself, just, taking a sabbatical or a gap year, but that was pretty cool to read in your bio. So thank you for sharing that and bringing that to light. So looking ahead, what do you envision as, the future of education and entrepreneurship? Do you see any emerging trends, anything that's particularly promising? What are you noticing?
It's a really interesting time to be working in this sector, and particularly at the place in the sector that I am in, which is the kind of interface between entrepreneurship and education. There are a few things that feel like they're really bubbling to the surface at the moment. I think one is there's been a kind of rapid realization within the education sector that the pace of change is quickening all the time, and schools need to find ways of engaging with big societal debates around things like AI and data in a way that perhaps they haven't had to up until now. I know that schools approach that conversation with some concern and with some trepidation, but I think there is also an enormously exciting opportunity in how those forces, if harnessed correctly, could be used as tools for good within the education sector. So I see a lot of friends and contacts who are working in ed tech, who are working now to support schools and guide them through these kind of uncharted waters. I was also excited to hear recently that a body's been formed of really well-respected heads in the UK to look at supporting the sector in how they navigate engaging with AI, for example. So that I think is quite interesting. So that's, I'd say, one of the big trends is looking at how schools engage with this question of AI and other, digital phenomena. I think the second really interesting trend is how schools are having to do a lot of introspection about how fit they are for purpose. And a lot of this is going back to quite core conversations around what is the meaning of an education? Why do we educate children? What do we educate them for? Where does the responsibility of a school begin and end in terms of preparing a child for their future? And, I think it's always a positive thing when organizations and institutions and sectors have to go back and reflect. And I'm excited to see what those conversations are going to lead to in terms of how we may see education shift in the future. And I think the third point is, I tend to be, I'm an optimist. Like I tend to see the world as, a glass half full. I think there are a lot of reasons to be kind of concerned or anxious or frustrated at the moment, but I also see huge opportunity as well. It's been enormously gratifying in the work that I do with Ox Sprite to see us being able to build tools faster and to share resources with thousands of students, because we now got the technology that enables us to do that. And so I feel very positive and excited about the future and the capacity of organizations like Ox Sprite to support students and schools to fulfill their potential.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I feel like I learned so much just from listening to you today. This is an interesting episode because most of my listeners, they're school counselors. And what advice would you give somebody who is a school counselor, maybe to just kind of diversify their skills in order to help students?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think we're all overwhelmed with information. And so I think one of my pieces of advice would be plug into a few sources of information that you really value and commit a portion of time, even if it's just like in the car on the way to work in the morning or on the train on the way home, just to delving into interesting tidbits. I think as an educator, it's very difficult to stay engaged and passionate and excited about what you are educating young people about unless you're kind of fueling your own fire. And so I think even if it's done in really kind of discreet, contained ways, that is potentially a really helpful strategy. So, you know, whether it's things like following some great people on LinkedIn that you find inspiring and producing great content, or signing up for newsletters from institutions or individuals that you find inspiring. I think those kind of tidbits can be really valuable for you and for your students. I think also I always encourage any educators that I work with to kind of be open with their students about the fact that they are still learning, and allow that to be a two-way street. So I'd say to my students, look, these are things I'm interested in, these are skills I'm looking to develop at the moment. Like, if any of you come across anything useful, please let me know. And that's quite an interesting dynamic to introduce to your classroom, where it's not always, you know, the teacher holds the knowledge and the students are the ones who get it, but there can be quite a useful transfer of information the other way, which I think can be quite helpful. I'd also really encourage guidance counselors who have been interested in our conversation or interested in Ox Sprite. I'd love to hear from them. I'm doing research all the time into how we can make the tools that we develop better and more helpful. So I'd love to hear about, you know, what problems are they facing in their roles? What are the solutions that they'd love to see? Anything like that, I would love to hear from them.
So how can people get in touch with you, Jo?
So the best way is to drop me an email on jo@oxsprite.org. That's JO. And they can find out more about Ox Sprite at oxsprite.org. And they can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm Joanna Cruz, FRSA, which is a weird set of letters that just means I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And yeah, I'd absolutely love to hear from them.
Thank you so much, Jo, for being a part of the WRC podcast today. I hope you had a good time. And
I loved it. Thank you.
I definitely learned a lot. And I know my global audience has probably taken away tidbits of knowledge today, and it was super helpful. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today and joining me and Jo on this exciting discussion about education and entrepreneurship and social change. I love to hear your feedback, and make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. Make sure that you share this episode with a friend or somebody that might be interested in these topics, and we'll catch you guys all on. Did you love the episode? I hope you're feeling inspired and no longer feeling alone out there, and you're ready to evolve and become a better person. Make sure that you share this podcast or take a screenshot and post it on your social media. That's how you help spread this podcast organically, and people can find it much easier when you share, or share it with a loved one. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and make it your mission to be a blessing in someone else's life today.